Hiya friends. So last week was balance week. We played a decent amount with balancing. And towards the end of the week we worked with Garudasana or eagle pose. And when we did, I was bringing in these elements of internal rotation and hugging into the midline. When we play in that way, I always have so many people comment on how that was such a useful tool. They've never been able to hold eagle pose like that. Eagle pose feels so different and so much sturdier, stable, etc., things like that. And so I wanted to make a shorter version of it for my friends who A, might not have as much time, but also B, you can really just take the time and just work through those elements and start to understand them, because they're useful in a lot of our poses, not just in eagle pose. Elements of it in pretty much every pose we do, we can probably bring it in, right? So let's break down some of that a little bit. You'll still do some regular old poses just like you always do, but it'll just have a couple of workshop type elements. You do need a block. If you don't have a block, you want something that is approximately that width, the shortest side of it, and not too heavy. A couple of the applications we're doing, or one of them anyway, you're not going to want it to be a heavy tool by any means. Come on down onto your back, but rather than going into full Shavasana, corpse pose, we're going to go into constructed rest pose, or at least the legs of it, right? So be pretty squarely in the middle of your mat, as you often are. Walk your feet out a little wide and let the knees lean in. For my friends who are very flexible and have deep knee flexion, we tend to bring our heels back quite a bit. It's not wrong, but move your heels out until your heels are approximately in line with your knees or so. And your arms come out, palms up. The knees do not have to touch at all. We just want the hips to soften as the knees lean in, right? The muscles don't have to hold the legs. Close the eyes. And take just a couple of moments. Scan through that body. Notice what you have going on in there today. Most all of us at this point in time have some chronic tension, a place that we're just constantly tight, right? Have been toned those muscles or tighten those muscles so much, so long that they are in a constant state of tension. So check into those areas and soften as much as you can anyway. And then check into those muscles that just happens to be today. Our shoulders are up to our ears and we can release that contraction, and there you go, yeah? I just want you to notice what it's like to have the legs in this position. Right now, both of your thighs, your femur bones, are moving into what is called internal rotation. So just notice what that feels like. If one leg can more readily go into that internal rotation. If the knees barely move, the thighs is really what we're talking about, not the knees, but we kind of, knees can be a place where we see it or notice it, right? Or are they just moving all the way in across a wide distance? One's not right or wrong. And then for just a moment, awareness in the breath. When we get into some of those bigger poses, sometimes we just hold our breath outright. So always trying to remember to find that slow, steady, smooth Ujjayi breath, or just the basic soft belly breath. And go ahead and open the eyes. So for the first part, let your knees come apart and just have them stacked kind of in line between the heels and the hips, right? So almost like if we were going to be doing windshield wiper. Now you're going to leave your left knee exactly as it is, and I'll mirror you here and face you this way. And then you're going to let your right knee fall over towards the left ankle. Now, don't muscularly fall into that or push into that, right? Let it fall in. And also, the hip doesn't have to stay on the ground, but try to keep that right hip fairly grounded. Try not to let it lift like we do in windshield wiper, yeah? And then just take a few moments and just let that settle in. Again, notice, what it feels like in the hip socket, if this feels easy or hard. Make sure, I forgot to say, flex the right foot for all the stuff that we're doing, just to make sure we keep the knee protected. But if this does go into your knee, you can try a couple of things. One, walk your foot a little further forward again and see if that helps, so you're not in such deep flexion, right? It could be that stepping it back actually relieves it, depending on your knee joint. Now, some of us, not all of us, but we might walk our foot out so it's a little off the mat even, no further than your knee being in line with your hip socket, right? And with that foot a little bit out, again, I'm gonna just soften and I'm gonna let that leg fall in as much as I can into internal rotation without me grabbing on muscularly or anything like that, right? And breathe. If you do want to look and see what the leg is doing, interlace your hands behind your head, right? So your poor neck doesn't have to work. But then you set back down. I'm just staying up to make a little bit of contact, right? And then I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to lift that leg and I'm going to come back with that foot to the edge of my mat and let my right leg stay steady. And I'm going to let my left knee fall over, keeping my left foot flexed. And I'm just going to stop, pause right here. Even if you know you're going to go to that next place, pause here for a second and just let that hip socket kind of take in what in the world we're about to do, right? Again, if you need to adjust the foot forward or back because you're noticing any kind of pain in the knee joint, otherwise just get out of here, don't even do it, right? Maybe walking that foot a little bit offside the mat, off the mat. And again, I'm not going to go very far. I want my knee no further out to the left than in line with my hip socket, yeah? And then I'm just letting that leg fall in. I'm trying to keep my left hip nice and soft and grounded. It's not on the ground, it's lifted a little bit, but I let it stay back that way, right? Soften that way. One more breath from there. And then come on back to neutral. So that is internal rotation. Now just for release, let's go ahead and let our legs move back and forth for windshield wipers. So your arms can be teed out and you can just simply let the knees sway from side to side. You can let that far hip lift as much as it wants to in this variation. You can turn the head the opposite direction. And then come on back to neutral. Walk your feet back into hip distance. Take the block and put the block on the shortest setting between your thighs and really try to get down by that pubic bone if you can. So we really get into some of the meaty part of the femur, right? The internal thighs. And then from there, I want you to go ahead and I want you to gently move into the block. That you're familiar with. I teach that all the time, right? And that's your corset turning on. But now I want you to imagine, if you will, that you could literally push that block down towards the ground with your internal thighs. So see if you can let your internal thighs pull the block so that the block moves through the legs down towards the heels. And if it helps you for a moment to put your fingertips on the block and push that direction, right? And then try to hold that as much as you can, even as you release the hands off the block. It's more of an energetic action than an actual action, but it's gonna make a lot of sense as we start to combine all this stuff and add on, yeah? Okay, now remove the block. Put the block off to the side. Walk your feet until your big toes touch. Cross your right thigh over your left and do that same action with your thighs. Your legs are in different position, right? But I want you to internally rotate the thighs and try to move those inner thighs forward towards the foot side of the mat. Now, go ahead and bring your left arm, oh, nope, I'm not mirroring you, I apologize. Your right arm under your left, and I'm gonna make sure, hopefully I don't get my microphone, and you might just simply hug, you might go into full ego arms here, and again, I'm trying to adjust my mic so that I'm not causing a bunch of chaos for you guys sound-wise. Those elbows might lift off the chest just a little bit, and you might just work from here and work the upper body. Tone those thighs towards the front of your mat again, internally rotate. I could say hug into the midline. I'll start using that soon, right? And now go ahead and lift those legs up if it's available. Now, on an inhale, keep hugging to the midline, right? Shins together, forearms together, but you're going to inhale and let your knees and your elbows separate a little bit. Don't go too far. Don't let your low back arch too much, yeah? Exhale, pull the elbows and the knees and pull the belly down flat in the low back. So it's cat-cow with an addition, right? Inhale, I move into a baby cow, toning my low belly, letting the limbs separate, elbows and knees, I mean. Exhale, I tone my belly down, I flatten my back first, and then I pull my elbows and knees together. One more, just like that. Remember, we've got 3 on the other side, so don't worry, you'll probably be feeling plenty here.
And now stay in, and again, hug everything into the midline. Rotate your inner groin towards the foot side of the mat, your thighs push together, your shins push together, your forearms push together, and come on down. Go ahead and release that and pause for just a moment before we do the second side. Hopefully those directions are making sense because we'll bring them into play when we're standing on one foot. Walk your feet into touch, cross your left thigh over your right, and your left arm is going to come underneath your right, and maybe you simply hug and your hands are on your shoulders. Maybe you do the full interlace of the forearms, right? Now, before you lift up, I want you to rotate your thighs forward. You'll feel how that brings the shins in towards one another. And again, that's that hugging of the midline I'm referring to, right? Now, maybe the elbows lift a little off the chest. Maybe those knees come in just a little bit. With an inhale, I move my elbows and knees away from each other. And I move towards a neutral spine or maybe a little cow here. And then exhale, pull into cat. And that pulling into cat is going to bring my limbs into each other. But keep hugging into the midline. Inhale, separate it out a little bit, right? Think cow. And then exhale, cat. So find the spine first and then add your limbs in. But the whole time today, I'm hugging into the midline as deeply as I can. Stay up and in your cat, elbows and knees towards each other. Again, can you internally rotate your thighs even further forward? Can your shins push together? Can your forearms push together? And go ahead and bring that all the way down. Pause, walk the feet out wide, let the knees lean in, and here we are, again, in a variation of constructed rest pose. Breathe, and if you're like, oh yeah, the breath. Told you. Me too, I do it a lot. Okay, so now we're gonna go ahead and we're gonna come up off of our backs. So you can bring the knees in to the chest, grab the backs of the thighs and rock yourself up. And you're gonna come right on up to standing. There's one more thing I wanna talk about that we'll bring in a little bit, and that is, I've talked about it before, but I like to call it drawstring pants. I think visuals are such beautiful tools of common things that we're used to. But if this right here, this part of my pants were the top of my pants, and I had strings, right? One that attached to this as-is bone and one that attached to this as-is bone. And I brought those strings together and I went to tie them, right? Those two pieces would move into each other. So I want you to imagine on your body, you're standing nice and tall in Tadasana. I want you to imagine that these two pieces, your two as-is bones, like drawstring pants, they pulled in together. And I don't know if you can see it on me. It's a very small movement, but it's very powerful, especially for my body, right? Is when I move those in towards each other, without me pulling my belly back, this action starts to knit those fibers to help me support the front of the body, but it's really the low back, right? Okay, so that is part of our drawing into the midline. The midline, if you don't know, take an imaginary line that cuts all the way from the top of my head, the crown of my head, all the way down to the ground, and it separates me into right and left, if I mirror you, right and left, and that's the midline. Yeah? So when I'm talking about hugging into the midline, everything comes into that center point. Okay. So now, let's go ahead and let's work a little bit with that block again. So grab that block, you're gonna put it between your legs. Again, come up by the pubic bone for this first round. Have your feet about hip distance. Put your fingertips on the block, and that's why I want it so high, right? Then you're not down so low. So you're gonna go ahead and you're gonna take the fingertips and you're gonna try to push that block back behind you. And it's not really about the block, right? Do you feel it? Your inner groins start to rotate back and you're hugging into the midline. Most of us, we use the outer groin way more, unless you're knock-kneed and pigeon-toed, right, which is only maybe 20% of the population. I don't know if that's completely accurate. I'll look it up. But most of us, we overuse our outer groin, and we tend to push the block forward. So I'm asking you to move that block back, right, and activate the inner part as well as the outer part. And then from there, you're going to go ahead, inhale, reach your arms up, knit that belly together, or draw towards the midline, right? Drawstring pants, and go ahead and start to sit down into chair pose. Weight in the heels. and come back up. Sorry about the bulky clothing. It is still cold in our space. We don't have our part yet. Go ahead and bend down, bend the knees and come down into chair pose, and inhale, come up. We're gonna come down in, by the way, all this stuff for all of my skiers, cross country, downhill, right? This is so good. Go ahead and pause right there. Now, I want you to, again, try to move that block without your fingertips. Can you move that block down towards the midline? If you know you're someone who's knock-kneed, you might need to activate the outer groin more, right? This might not be the practice for you. And then from there, keep moving that block back, and now can you lift your right heel up? The block gets a little funky, but it's okay. And bring that down. And lift your left heel up. Keep rotating down, right, with those inner groin, and bring that down. Lift your right heel up, keep that belly toning up, that drawstring pants action so you don't go into the low back. Bring that down. Lift your left heel. Notice my hips are not moving. I don't mean you have to look at me, but don't let your hips move when you do that. And come back down, push into the heels, come up. Release the block off to the side, and you're gonna put it to the outside of your right foot. We don't need it quite yet, but that way it'll be there when we do need it, right? So same kind of action. I'm going to take off a layer here so you can see me a little bit better, but let me adjust my microphone. Maybe not. Where's my crew, makeup, hair. Okay, so standing up nice and tall, I want you to imagine that block is between your thighs, and I want you to imagine that your fingertips were pushing the block back. Drawstring pants, bring that into the midline. Again, we're hugging into that midline, yeah? Now go ahead and bend the knees, but keep hugging into the midline. Don't go knock-kneed. Be careful you're not going in. You can always look down and see, right? And then from there, you're gonna lift the left heel. Now, without lifting or moving your hips or your spine or anything, or as little as possible, I do move a little bit, but I try not to. I'm gonna lift my toes off of the earth and hover, right? And I'm gonna hug into the midline, right? And I'm gonna bring that down. So again, I'm gonna lift my right heel for a second without much else moving, as little as possible, hugging into the midline. I'm gonna lift my toes for a hot second. And bring that back down, adding on. We're gonna lift our left heel, right? And then from there, we're gonna try to lift the toes without anything really displacing. And then I want you to go all the way over, and please bring your toes down. Even if you're a professional eagle, I want you to bring your toes down for this, for today, right? Now go ahead and bring your left arm underneath your right and either hug or go into your full interlace, right? Now, before you do anything else, any idea what I might say? It makes all the difference in the world, or I wouldn't say it 5,000 times, I swear to goodness. Drawstring pants, right? Your as-is bones pull together. Your thighs, they're gonna rotate back as if the block was still between them. Notice that that hugs your shins into each other. Hug your forearms into each other. Lift the elbows up a little bit. Don't let the low back overarch. And then on an exhale, you're gonna pull your belly into cat. And you're gonna go ahead, low back and belly, right? And you're gonna come on down into that same shape we just had on the floor, but keep your foot grounded, your left foot, right? Inhale, come back up. Today, it's not about the balance. Today, it's about working that midline. Exhale, pull the belly into cat and bring yourself, we call this the eagle moving into its nest or some such thing sometimes. Inhale, come all the way up, pause, hug into the midline, rotate the internally rotate the thighs. You might put your left foot on the block and push the left foot out, or the block out if you don't want it. Don't wrap the foot today if you don't mind though. And then again, pull the belly into cat. And go ahead and come all the way down, squeeze into the midline, squeeze into the midline, squeeze into the midline, squeeze into the midline. Inhale, push into that heel, that right heel. Come all the way up and release it. So then after you've worked those lines, maybe then you move into the full wrap. But here's the deal. Two deals. Ha ha ha. My lecture begins. More often than not, when we wrap our foot around the shin, our hips come off balance, right? They are no longer in neutral. The one hip of the top leg has pulled forward, and I could be tweaking my knee or my low back, right? It's not wrong, it's just noticing if that's happening for you. More importantly, for our purposes of today, when I wrap that around,
I stop working my legs as much because I've got a bind, right? And unless you're doing it very specifically and you're telling yourself to hug into the midline and find all the bits and pieces, this takes away all of that good work that you could be finding muscularly that I feel is more supportive for the longevity of the body than just whooping around into a bind and just holding yourself there. So, so hopefully that makes sense. So release the binds today, or some of them anyway, the foot bind, and release this idea of I got to balance today. You don't. Today, take that part out of it. Use the block and put your foot on it. Find all of the muscular action so that the next time you come into this without the block, you're more solid, more stable. Stand up tall. Imagine the block. Rotate the block back. As is, bones in, drawstring pants, and start to sit down in a chair. Bend the right knee without much moving at all. Go ahead and try to cross over, and please bring the left foot down, or the right foot, down to the block today, right? You're gonna bring your right arm underneath your left and either hug or interlace this bind, right? What I'm asking a lot of this bind today, you notice I keep talking about the forearms moving in and being really active, right? So again, before you do anything else, I rotate my internal groin. I go towards internal rotation. I'm not an internal rotation, but I work that direction, right? I move my as-is bones into each other. I move my forearms into each other, and I hug in nice and tight. Now inhale, think of going into baby cow, elbows reach up a little bit. I don't go high at all. Exhale, pull the belly into cat, and then bring your limbs in towards each other, yeah? Hug into the midline. Inhale, push that left heel, right? Tone the belly, keep hugging into the midline and come up. And exhale, pull the belly back into cat. The low back rounds behind you. That's what brings your elbows and knee. I'm not just shoving my elbows and knees together. Inhale, come up. If you want it, you can lift the toes and push that block off to the side without changing much. I wish I'd left mine. You could also drop your toes to the ground. Inhale. And exhale one more time, come down in. Again, don't bind the foot, but push in, hug in. The more I internally rotate my thighs, the more my shins automatically move into each other, right? So really into the midline, right? Bring it in. Now push that left heel down to come up. Unwind your eagle. Whew. Pause for a moment. Notice what you notice. So most of what we've just done has been hugging into the midline, which I think is brilliant. I absolutely love it. It's a line I need because I tend to be a rib flarer, right? I tend to let this area just ploop forward. Right, and so for me, I have a little extra lordosis I don't need. So the hugging into the midline really helps my body with that. So again, you know, maybe this practice doesn't speak to your body and you don't need it. But for many of us, we could use it. Come on down onto your back. We're gonna do one more little expansive thing since we've been so contained. You're gonna come into a big old X shape. And just pause there for a moment, right? So I always think of, you know, not quite to the top, but moving towards the top of a snow angel. Now I'm going to bring my right hand onto my left shoulder. And again, I'm sorry if I get my mic. This is kind of a funky one. I'm going to lengthen my right arm out. That hand, I'm going to move that right hand all the way to the left hand. I'm going to keep my neck so soft. My right hip totally gets to lift if it wants to, but I'm not muscularly lifting it. And I just reach as far as I comfortably can. And then I keep reaching with my right hand. My neck's off. And I let my right hip gently fall back down towards the ground. And I just take a breath into any expansion I might be getting in that lower right back or side waist. Come back through center, come out into your grand X. Put your left hand on your right shoulder. Again, I'm just gonna slide my hand all the way out towards my right palm, maybe to it, maybe past it. I let my left hip lift, but my left foot stays wide. Once I get to whatever my final position is, so to speak, I don't really love the word final. I wish I hadn't used that. Let your left hip soften back down towards the earth. There is no final position.
right? It shifts and it changes. We work poses differently depending on what we're trying to find that day. And roll yourself out into your X. Pause. Close the eyes. Now, if you want to come down into a more traditional Shavasana, you can, especially if it feels better in the joints. But if this feels okay, we're just going to be here for about 5 breaths. Inhale. Exhale. Inhale. Exhale. Pardon me. Inhale. Exhale. Last one. Inhale. Exhale. I'm still going to suggest that you come towards the fetal position to come up and keep a little softness here at the end. So I like to walk my feet in a little bit and then bring my knees up, roll to one side. You're going to push that floor away, come on up to an upright posture. She says as she falls over. And I don't want you to do an extreme version of it, right? But what happens if you think of just a really gentle movement into the midline? And I talk about this line, but I often use different language. But it's that corset, right? If we think about that corset being around our hips, our low waist, up to the ribs, and it gently moves in on all sides of the body, the front, the back, the sides, right? It gently moves in and hugs into the midline and then lengthens up. Hopefully we're not turning a bunch of muscles on. It's a very, very subtle motion. Bring those palms together in front of your heart. Inhale. Exhale, bow the head in. A moment of gratitude that you gave yourself the space and the time. Namaste, friends. So hopefully you find that a helpful tool, you know, and now that I've introduced that, especially in classes and now the video, you know, I'll start to bring it in. I often talk about hugging into an imaginary block between your thighs, but, you know, when we're in those lunges and those various things, the tendency is to let the leg go wide. I could also say, instead of just hug into the block, that's the easier. Now we're getting a little more advanced. We're rotating our inner groin into internal rotation or towards internal rotation to bring the leg into neutral, right? So we can start to bring it into so many of our postures. Be well.